Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Future of Sales. I'm your host, Sahil Mansouri, CEO of Bravado, and with me today is a familiar face to many in the world of SaaS and businesses and sales, Patrick Campbell, co-founder and CEO of ProfitWell, formerly Price Intelligently. What up, man? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm super excited. Don't always get to sound off on sales and things like that. So I'm excited to go deep on something I normally don't talk about.
There you go. And I think, for the benefit of our viewers and our listeners, perhaps you could just give a little background on what ProfitWell is and what you guys do, which I think will be a good framing for our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the kind of the back of the baseball card stats, we're about a 50-person company here in Boston, fully bootstrapped, which is kind of like a fun little fact. And our core product is a free subscription financial metrics. So you plug in your Braintrees, Stripe, Zora, whatever you're using, and basically get free access to your MRR, your churn, all those important numbers. And then we sell products that basically help move important numbers in ProfitWell. So we sell a product called Retain that basically takes care of your mechanical or delinquent churn. We sell a product called Price Intelligently, which was actually the first product that's just on, been helping you with your pricing. We sell a couple of other things, but the whole model is all about subscription companies. And at this point, we actually have about 25% of the market using one or more of our products. And so we're pretty pumped at having this nice little center, or one of the centers of the subscription universe, just because we can learn so much.
That's right. And, pricing is one of the core, foundational skill sets that you learn as a salesperson. And you see wildly different tactics that are used by different companies, by different sales managers, by different sales reps. And, I've worked at organizations that, where let's say that the baseline sticker price for a piece of software is $10,000. Let's just say it's an annual subscription, it's $10,000. And come the last week of the month, that number can vary wildly.
2,000.
Come the last day of the month, that number can really vary wildly. Where we're selling deals that are 70, 80, 90% off of list price, just because there's some number we need to hit, or just because there's some goal that's in front of the team or whatnot. And we have had a number of guests on this show talk about the concept of quotas and how all of that affects the mechanic around buyers and sellers, and the lack of trust around salespeople because of pushiness. And there's a lot to unpack here. But I think where I want to start, because you sit on a mountain of data that I have never had access to, so let me take advantage here.
Yeah. And you won't, because it's very private. So yeah.
That's right. But you have trends that you have access to. And specifically for that, I'd love to hear, what do you see in the market as far as, the way that sales teams and companies price their products and discounting and whatnot? Because I think that's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, I think there's a couple places where we can start. And I think starting on kind of like a nice tactical little bit of myth busting is probably the best place.
Great.
So what's really interesting is we did a study, and we published this a little while ago, and I can share it maybe for the show notes, but we basically looked at companies that hit their goals, their quarterly quotas, and separated them into two groups. One group that did really, really low discounting. So like minimal, like loyalty discounts. Hey, here's 5%, or hey, here's just a couple percent because we're buddies, or because I'll get you over the line on the last day of the month. And then we also looked at companies that were aggressive discount. And what we noticed is that when you looked at the trend over a quarter, basically the folks doing minimal discounts was very incremental, meaning they were adding revenue every single day. Basically, it was just kind of going up and to the right every day. There weren't huge spikes. There weren't huge craters. It was just very, very focused. And then when we looked at the companies that were doing aggressive discounts, basically the quota was trending flat, if not really low, until kind of mid-quarter or so. And then all of a sudden, you saw this huge swing where there was this huge growth rate in the second half of the quarter, and they hit their goal, right? And they actually beat the people who did slower discounts. Now, you look at that data and clearly there's a difference. Clearly those heavy discounters, there's a lot of things going on in that sales team. But when we actually study some of the lurking variables with those two groups, what we found is that those companies that had the incremental, very, very low discount, but still hit their goals, churn rates were basically nothing. Like churn was very, very low. The kind of happiness or NPS scores were very, very high. The actual like ARPU was actually going up, meaning their pricing was really, really good. And then when you looked at the numbers for the aggressive discounters, it was basically everything was the opposite, right? And so to kind of start things off, I think that the big thing is that really good sales teams, they understand their customers on a really, really good level, or they're able to understand their customers throughout the sales process. And what that allows them to do is just sell in a really intelligent way versus folks who are just kind of throwing stuff up against the wall, just trying to send 1,000 emails to get 10 responses and trying to discount to all hell, in a handbasket towards the end of the quarter. Those folks are just setting up a company for not complete failure, but for a lot of failure. So that's kind of some interesting to kind of kick things off. To kind of summarize that, what we found is that those customers who received over a 30% discount, I think it was actually closer to 25%, their willingness to pay for the product dropped by actually 50 to 75% at renewal. So basically you weren't able to defend the value, and the churn rates of those customers were insane. And so it's just kind of showing you that basically if you're discounting over 25, 30%, you're just not selling to the right customers. And inevitably what ends up happening is those customers just, they weren't ready, and they should have waited another few months to really understand the product or got a little longer sales cycle.
So, okay. So first of all, that data that you just shared is intuitively completely unsurprising, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say that it, as a salesperson, that most commonly the reason that you're discounting is because a buyer isn't ready to make a purchase or is not convinced of the value. So you're using money as a hook in order to get them to accelerate a decision or to make a purchasing decision entirely.
Yep.
And the problem with that is manyfold, but where it really comes back down to is payback period, which is to say that in SaaS, it's very different from selling a car where a person walks onto a lot, you sell them a vehicle. If they buy the vehicle and they drive off the lot, they're gone, right? I mean, you can't return it. You can't bring the car back. And if a year later or 3 months later that person is dissatisfied with their purchase, well, too bad. I mean, you bought it, it's done. No sales are final. And that is definitely not the case in SaaS, right? And the vast majority of salespeople that we interact with, I think, both your company and mine, is in SaaS businesses. And there, the payback period can be 3 years or 4 years. Like you need to retain customers for a very long period of time in order to be able to continue to raise venture funding, which we'll dive into in just a bit because you've got a unique perspective on that. In order to be able to continue to raise venture funding, it's not enough to just show top line growth. The days of Groupon and Box and Zenefits and companies like that who basically just piled humans and piled top line revenue growth and then said, oh, one day we'll figure out how to make a profit. Those days are gone. Now VCs are much more conscientious about retention and about churn and about payback period and about ARPU, which you mentioned, which is average revenue per user, which is a metric of how much revenue are you getting per person who's using your product, which is a really healthy gauge of how well you're pricing. You've got a very different world today than we used to have. So why haven't sales teams caught up to the fact that coercing a buyer to buy by offering a heavy discount when you yourself are unconvinced if the buyer is going to get value, let alone the buyer being convinced to get value, is a recipe for just high churn and a disastrous financial model because you're just losing money on that deal.
Yeah, I think I do think sales is catching up. You have, products like yours, obviously, that help, with certain things like that. And then you have, this whole conversational marketing revolution and you have all this kind of stuff that's that's kind of helping sales teams be better. Now, some of that's aspirational, meaning, hey, we know this is great for top sales teams, but they're still not using these products. And the reason they're not is typically twofold. One, a lot of these tactics work, right? So if I'm trying to basically be a used car salesman when it comes to SaaS and subscriptions, and I loved kind of the example that you gave, because this is the first business model, the subscription model, where the relationship is baked right into revenue. So if that user doesn't like you anymore, they're going to churn and they're not going to, come back, right?
Right.
But I think what ends up happening is in a lot of businesses, this still works because enough people will basically like the product and upgrade. And so those people who thought the product was terrible and the experience was terrible, they'll just move on, and there's enough people to sit into the funnel. But I think that those times are basically waning. So basically you're seeing this world where most of the markets that we're going into, because they're crowded, because it's harder and harder to acquire customers, there's no more gold rush, exactly like you're talking about. And so we're kind of in that transition period. And the other thing that really is causing people to change is that for the first time in a lot of businesses, and this is terrible to say because this should have been happening for a decade, but for the first time, we have end-to-end analytics in a lot of our businesses. You would be amazed at the number of companies that we still talk to that you talk to them about, well, what's the retention by channel? Meaning someone who came in through Facebook or someone came in through SEO. They don't have an answer to that question. And they're a $100 million company, right? And they've spent a ton of money. They've raised a ton of cash. They've really done things in a very blunt force way. And now it's easier and easier to really track those things. And so we can realize in the context of that pressure, what we need to do and what we can actually fix.
I really like the emphasis on analytics there, because companies are becoming increasingly more savvy. We kind of call it the Moneyball revolution, right? Where
I like that.
Where people are starting to wake up to the fact that, hey, all these numbers make sense. And just as a point on Moneyball, by the way, I was reading an article just this morning on, I can't remember if it was The Athletic or it was one of these Players Tribune or something like that, about Albert Pujols. And so as a young baseball fan growing up, I kind of grew up admiring Albert Pujols. I'm a Giants fan. He was a Cardinal, and so like there's some natural distance there. But he was just so good, and he was like the most consistent hitter of all time. And he basically this year is batting .250, and he went on record to say, well, the only reason I'm batting .250 instead of my career average of .300 is because 50 points worth of my hits are being taken away by the defensive shift. And so they've realized that Albert Pujols is incredible at hitting the ball hard up the middle. And so they've taken the second baseman and they've stuck him basically right over second base, but 20 feet past the infield. And so any shot he hits right past the pitcher,
it's going to get caught.
Basically the second baseman either catches or fields and throws to first. And that used to be a guaranteed base hit. If you ever hit the ball over the second base, the shortstop and the second baseman always have a gap there. But for Pujols, they don't leave that gap because they know that he never ever hits like weak ground balls between first and second. So they just don't put anybody there.
Yeah.
And Pujols was standing up there saying, well, they should eliminate the defensive shift because, this is the way that baseball is supposed to be played. And like, this is supposed to be a hit. And, it's not just me, it's for the whole like betterment of the game. And meanwhile, I'm reading this and I'm thinking to myself, like, dude, you're a dinosaur. Like, if you think that you can just legislate innovation out of the game because it's personally hurting you, as opposed to standing up and saying, you know what? I'm lucky that I played in an era where people didn't do this. Now, as a hitter, you have to be savvy. Like, we need to improve. Like, I want to teach my teammates in order to how like they can adapt to it as a senior citizen and steward of the game. And it reminded me a lot of sales, actually, and a lot of the way that sales leaders think, which is to say, we are so scared of things like transparency in pricing. If you go to a company's website and look up their pricing. So many companies still have like contact sales in order to find pricing. Why? Like who wants to contact sales to find pricing? Like companies should be transparent, but instead of embracing the fact that we need to have greater transparency, they're trying to hide even more. It confuses me. I don't understand that logic.
I think it comes from a world where we had massive information asymmetry, right? If you go back to your used car, just your car example, right? I've worked on cars, I've changed my own oil, but at this point in time, I have no idea what's going on with modern cars because you can't even really work on your own car anymore because it's all electronics and things like that, right? So all of a sudden I'm talking to a salesperson, they have so much power over me because I don't really know the truth. Now, they have less power than they might have had 5 to 10 years ago because I can use the internet to see if they're giving me BS or not. But that information asymmetry still kind of exists. And what we're noticing is that with more and more competition in the market, with more difficulty in acquiring customers in the world of subscriptions, you're just living in this world where that information asymmetry is coming down. You have this defensive shift, if you will, of people being able to research, a lot of referrals and word of mouth, people not contacting you until they're deep in the research process, and you might not have made that cut if you don't have your pricing there. And so for me, the kind of the rule of thumb, and we've seen this with data, is that if you're really early on and you're just optimizing for high friction conversations because you have no idea what you're doing, so you just want to talk to the people who really, really care and are willing to get on the phone with you, that's great. Don't put your pricing up. That makes total sense. If you have really custom deals where every single customer that comes on or every single prospect that comes on, it's like a different package, then totally fine to not have that pricing up there. If you're anything in between, and even if you are that latter example, you should have some context. Hey, this starts at $10,000. Hey, prices are between $20,000 and $50,000. Prices start between $50 and $100, or just actually have the pricing out there. And the reason for that is because you don't want bad leads. We don't want people coming to us thinking price intelligently costs $50. We don't want those types of people because it's a waste of our sales team's time. Now, we will talk to them. We have a bunch of resources for them. We'll nurture them. But we want them to see on our website, even though there's a lot of customization with that product in terms of what the actual price is, all of a sudden it's like we want them to understand that, hey, here's a benchmark. So if that's not the benchmark, we probably shouldn't get on the phone to talk about a partnership. Instead, you should just use the free product, chat in to get some advice, that type of thing. But I think that you're seeing that more and more, that pressure, because again, consumers are getting more information and more power, which I would argue is good, but you could make an argument that businesses losing a ton of power is not so good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having worked at Glassdoor and having seen employers recoil at the concept of anonymous reviews from candidates and from their employees and people putting salary information out there, and that being seen as like a violation of trust, and shouldn't this be illegal, and all these other things that we see, to today's world where no one would ever take a job without going to a company's Glassdoor page. I guess I have a pretty strong point of view on this, which is you can't close your eyes and pretend that no one else can see you too. The world doesn't work that way. And so, and given a choice between obfuscation and transparency is always going to win.
100%.
No information. That's the world that we live in. And so therefore, I think you as a company either embrace it or you fall behind. I do want to touch on something that I've actually had a couple of conversations with sales leaders about, that they say that, and back to your initial point that you made about 25 to 30% plus pricing breaks and the hockey stick of sales and coming in at the end of the month or end of the quarter. What do you see around buyer behavior, if anything? Because what we hear is that, buyers are comped or procurement people are comped based on beating you down on price. And they know that if we wait till the end of the month or the end of the quarter, that the price is going to drop. And so they intentionally don't buy. Until then, and they wait for the discount. And now it's like, we can't break the cycle because buyers expect it. What do you have any thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I got a ton of thoughts because we face it because we do enterprise deals ourselves, where they typically have a procurement department. What we've done, and this is what we've learned off of some pretty successful folks, and also just seeing some data in the market. This is where the strength or the power of a good salesperson really comes into play, because in that discovery call, it's like the classic advice, right? That for some reason a lot of people don't follow, which is asking, okay, so what's this process like for you guys? So we're gonna have this, then we have a security review, then we're gonna loop in Joe or Jamie or whomever from that department, and then you have procurement. Okay, good to know. Like anything that they look out for, like right, like it's the classic, thinking about the actual sales journey. And as soon as you know that there's procurement, the price automatically goes up 10 to 15%, because the procurement person they want that 10 to 15%, and you don't want to get on the phone with that person and go, oh crap, I forgot. Now I have to try to like take stuff away so the price doesn't change, but they're going to have to knock you down somehow, right? And instead, like you get on the phone with that person and it's a little bit of back and forth here and there, but it's, you can be straight with them and say, what are you guys trying to do? Right? Like what's a win here for you? Okay, let me see if I can get that. And you've already kind of raised that price a bit to help them with that. I think the other piece of this, particularly with quarters, is if you're not a public company, which most people probably listening to this aren't, you have power over what your quarter is defined by. So we actually offset our quarters by, I'm not going to say because I don't want anyone to then use this against us, but we offset our quarters by a number of days, if not weeks. I'll just be very broad there. So our quarters don't end when the average quarter does. And that helps a lot because our sales team, and we're big enough but small enough where we can be a little flexible in certain places because we don't want that pressure to basically be the reason why our sales team is being pushy. So those are a few things that we've seen, and those are the things that we've kind of adopted to basically combat this.
I mean, Salesforce, I think, invented this concept of a quarter ending on January 30th or 31st,
Yeah.
as opposed to December, because, I mean, I think the initial concept there was, everybody's on Christmas holiday and New Year's, and you're trying to get deals done, and it's a shit show, and so you just offset it by a month. But now it's becoming more and more in vogue because people are realizing, like, oh, wait, like this actually helps us, in terms of our negotiation as well.
Time is a construct, right? It's a man-made invention. Yeah.
That's right. But let's talk philosophically about the concept of quota for a second.
Oh boy.
Because I have a crazy opinion on this, which is to say that quotas are singularly responsible for the negative stigma around sales. In that if we eliminated the concept of a quota and salespeople were compensated based on the number of deals that they closed, and there was no concept of how much you had to bring in every month. It was just, you could, as much as you hunted, you got to eat. But there was no number attached to that. There was no additional spiffs attached to going over or clawbacks if you didn't hit certain numbers, and like we didn't do accelerators and decelerators and all these other things. That the entire profession of sales would have like there would be a bunch of people who would leave because they would be like, well, if I'm not going to get all these accelerators and I'm not going to be in it for, but those are probably the people that you don't want selling anyway, because they're just selfish purposes. And then what I think you would end up with, and again, this is a crazy idea, so I'm just gonna finish with a crazy thought. I think what you'd end up with is a much more buyer-centric sales process, because quotas are singularly tied to internal vendor things. They have nothing to do with the buyer. And so if my quota is $25,000 this quarter or this month, let's just say my quota is $25K, and I'm at $17,500 and I need $7,500 to hit my quota. And if my product costs $10,000 and I've got a deal and I go to my boss and I say, hey, I need $7,500. Can I offer a discount to this to this company. They're going to say yes, and then I'm going to go and offer the discount. They're in line, but only if you sign this month, because otherwise and then of course, like, this is the whole pushiness around sales. And I think that there's a lot of negative ramifications to having quotas. What are your thoughts on this?
I think, I feel like it's like comparing communism and capitalism. It's like, yeah, this is a really great idea in theory, but the reason is because I think about there's the kind of pejorative phrase that salespeople are coin operated, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of those people where your sales, like the way you compensate salespeople, has a lot of power. Decelerators, accelerators. I've seen it work where we all of a sudden, offer deceleration on certain things and acceleration on certain things, and literally took a quarter to change things, right? It didn't take a year like we thought it was going to take. It took a quarter, right? But I see your point, and I think I have a little bit of a different view. That's in the spirit of what you're saying, but I feel like when you have quota that controls that salesperson, you either aren't supporting that salesperson in some way, the pricing isn't set up in the right way to support and kind of take discounting out of the entire equation. Just to give you an example, if there's a value metric based pricing model, basically it's like one of those things where, you can't really discount that. I mean, you can, but if you're charging per 100 visits or per 100 XYZ or even per user, yes, you could calculate what that is, but really you're not necessarily going to discount the actual core product. And also, if you make sure that you have some flexibility for quota relief and things like that, I think you can kind of mix the benefits of what you're describing and the benefits of an actual quota. Now, that being said, most companies that you go into with quotas, they basically think of salespeople as cogs, and they're, points in a spreadsheet. And what ends up happening is basically exactly like you said. It's, well, they hit their number. Nope. Well, we're not going to give them discounting authority. And so let's just get rid of them if they can't make it happen. And that's normally larger companies, right? Like I think about HubSpot, and HubSpot has a really, really good sales organization, but some of the sales comp stuff that we've heard that they're currently doing, it only makes sense at a company of the size of HubSpot. Like if we implemented that here, it would be terrible. It would be a terrible idea. So I don't know, I guess I'm not saying yes or no to what you're saying in terms of an opinion. I'm kind of saying, it doesn't feel like it's completely possible, but the spirit of it, I think, is really, really good.
Well, so one additional lens to look at this conversation with, because again, I think that quotas and pricing are so directly correlated, and ultimately, but I want to go back to what you were saying around salespeople being coin operated.
Yep. Not all salespeople, but in aggregate.
No. We're not cherry picking on individual salespeople. We're saying as an industry, we consider salespeople to be coin operated, and there's this whole concept of hire for and fire to, and you're only as good as your performance last quarter, and there's all these like adages around sales.
Glenn Ross,
That's right. Always be closing, and Wolf of Wall Street, and whatever it takes to close the deal, and always be closing. So look, the reality is, if I look at job descriptions for salespeople, I see a lot of adjectives like hustler. I see sales ninja. I see someone who's aggressive, someone who's competitive. I see someone who's got a lot of, like a whatever it takes kind of mentality. I see a lot of things like that, and then when I talk, so I get sitting at Bravado, I get the opportunity to not just speak to salespeople, but I get the opportunity to talk to a lot of buyers. And when I talk to buyers, it's funny. Nobody wants to buy from a hustler. It's weird, right? Like, when I ask them adjectives of what types of salespeople they want to work with, they're like, I want someone who's technical, someone who's got a lot of product expertise, someone who's respectful, someone who's kind, someone who's
relationship. Yeah.
Right. So why are we hiring people that are almost the antithesis of the kind of person that our buyers actually want to buy from?
Yeah, I think it's the old school versus the new school, man. I think that you look at old school, it still respects that. And some of that's okay. Like a little bit of like, obviously motivation and drive is very, very different than the hustler, the huckster, if you will, like those types of things. And so I think for me in particular, the way I look at, like when I look at our sales team, we had people who were a little way too relationship-y. And then we had people, we never really hired like the traditional, I'm slinging and crushing deals, like that kind of guy or gal. But I think that in a lot of ways that culture is, what you repeatedly do, and it's the habits and behaviors that you have. I think it just is the same thing with like your sales team. I think if you hire a lot of, huckstery, aggressive folks, that's what your sales process is going to be. And you better have a product that is low ARPU and just is slinging calls, right? And most of us, we're moving into markets where relationships are important and product expertise, like you said. And so to me, it's more like, if you are cultivating your sales culture in the right way to be buyer centric and having some of that flexibility, and maybe, yes, having some quotas and some accelerators here and there, depending on what it is, I think you can kind of bridge this gap between the old school and the new school. I've seen it done in a number of organizations. Like one that I would think about is Help Scout. I don't know if you've heard of that company. They're a help desk. They're pretty big. Nick Francis is the CEO, and he's a very kind of design product oriented person. And he didn't even want salespeople because, of the stigma about sales folks, but they do sales the way that Help Scout would do sales, which is very relationship, very customer, because they're a support, desk and a help desk.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think it's you can build the sales team you want, right? And, you adjust and, reset based on what's good and what's bad, basically.
I think that, so let's just shifting gears for a moment, and then we'll bring it back here. We see the rise of chatbots and kind of innovation in AI when it comes to sales, and we're not as far along as everyone thinks we are. But
yeah,
also, not to just be filled with platitudes, but I really do believe in the short run we overestimate how much change there will be, and in the long run we underestimate how much change there will be. And so I think in the short run nothing's going to change, but I think in the long run buyers will have a choice one day. Either I'm going to talk to a salesperson, or I'm just going to chat with some AI thing, or I'm just going to like buy through the website or whatever, where basically interaction with a salesperson will become a choice as opposed to a forced necessity. And I think that you see that in B2C today already, where if I go to Netflix's homepage and I'm not logged in, I just see, $7.99 a month, no credit card required, 1 month free trial, click here to watch. That's what it does. I go to Amazon, it's like one click to buy. Here's all your reviews. You do your own research, select the product you want, purchase it. And I think B2B is just always 10 years behind B2C. So if you go 10 years forward, I think this will be the norm in B2B. And so as a profession of sales, which obviously I, in the way that you champion, pricing, pricing well, and pricing intelligently, and
there you go.
And making sure that you're maximizing the value that you're getting from each customer without like scaring off the market or whatever. We champion salespeople at Bravado in the profession of sales. And in fact, I've written like a Hippocratic oath of sales where, talking about a code of conduct and best practice and like ethics around sales and stuff. So there's like a lot of things that we do in the space, but, I am very nervous about the future of our industry unless we stop doing things that customers would, if they had a choice, would just make them say, all right, well, screw this, I'm not going to deal with you. And one of the things that I am most sensitive towards, the thing that is really annoying, because it happens to me every single month and every single quarter for any product that I've ever taken a demo of, ever, the sales rep magically emails me and says, hey, Sahil, I've got just 1 or 2 more discounts left to go this month, and we can do 30%. And I know that wasn't a good time. And it's just like, all it makes me think is, holy crap, like you must just not be at quota, like you just must be struggling. It just makes everything feel so desperate. And that is a feeling that I think is that nobody likes. And so if we go back to our conversation around sales and the way it's done and quotas and all the rest of it, is there a world in which the profession of sales that you mentioned, Help Scout, which I think is just a great example. I'm gonna bug you for an intro to that CEO. I want to chat with him. But is there a world in which salespeople and sales as a profession survives in the long run, not in the short run?
Yeah.
But in the long run, without adopting just like a completely different set of practices that just are not archaic and old school, like I just don't see it,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, sales has been around for thousands of years, right? In some manner, whether it was, someone trying to trade something in a market or sell something in a market, right? I think there's Kyle Porter over at Sales Loft, I think has kind of the best quote on this, and I'm going to butcher it, but sales is basically like, it's like, I can't even remember it, unfortunately, but it's like something along the lines of, it's transferring belief and transferring the value from your mind to the other person. He says it much more eloquently. And I think that sales will still exist in that manner, but it'll be less trickery, right? Because we can't, there will probably always be some trickery in sales. And I use that term very specifically because it's not always nefarious, but it still is a little bit of trickery, if that makes sense. I think it's just going to be, we'll kind of have seen the playbook over and over again. And then in the world of like human beings and human psychology, it'll be a lot easier to understand BS and trust and all those types of things. And so the salesperson's job will be more like, okay, cool. So what questions do you have? It's a little bit more of a reactive, you're ready to go, or I reached out at the exact right time. This doesn't feel bad for either of us. This feels super personable and super relationship based. And I feel like I can call you when I need something else as a customer. And I think that's where the evolution is going to go. And basically just because information asymmetry is going to decrease significantly, it's just going to keep decreasing. And I think that's great. I think that's a world where we'll exist and we won't feel bad about ourselves. And, the aggressive folks will move on to, I don't even know, the small industries that'll still have large information asymmetry.
That's right. And, something to that point, which I really believe in, and I really, agree with you deeply, is the fact that information asymmetry is at the core of the trickery in sales. Mm-hmm. So I would say that because it is just that, like, buyer asks you a question, does your product do this? Now you as a salesperson have a choice. You can either say yes or you can say no. Most of the time you're going to say yes and or yes but instead of saying no, because if you say no, then you're likely to lose the deal or potentially going to lose the deal.
Yeah.
And it is that ability of a salesperson to deceive, because it is deception at its core. It is the ability to deceive that information asymmetry allows. But now if the buyer is able to just ask that question openly and get the answer from someone who isn't incentivized to sell you, then I think that at that moment, what is the role of a salesperson? So when I think of like the role of a salesperson in the future, I think that there will be kind of a hybrid of salesperson and sales engineer, where everyone will become more technical, everyone will become more product focused. And just in the same way that you hire Bain or Accenture or McKinsey or someone to come in and do analytics and make recommendations that are in your best interest because you paid them and they are therefore going to consult you, I think that there will be a rise of a class of professionals who will be middlemen between vendors and buyers. I really do believe that. I think that there will be professional purchasers, like my MarTech stack advisor, and that person.
Yeah. You're kind of seeing this already. This is popping up. I mean, a lot of the research firms like Forrester and Gartner and things like that, they're starting to do a lot of that. Either through kind of like aggregate reporting or through, I believe, some one-on-one research. But that, yeah, I think it's super interesting you say that. I think it's, I think that there will be a rise of that, and it's kind of juicing the whole concept of like word of mouth, right? Because that person is basically an influencer in the market. But I don't know. I do think that the deception will decrease or the trickery will decrease, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like there's still gonna be sales, and there's still gonna be, we're gonna have this conversation, but maybe the inputs or the things we complain about are gonna be a little bit different. But it's, that's just the nature of human beings, and wanting to always be better.
There you go. I think that's a fun point for us to end this session, because this has been a blast. And Patrick, I could honestly spend the next like 5 hours here talking to you about this stuff. You're just a blast to chat with, man.
Thanks, man.
For anyone who wants to get a hold of you, what is the best way to get in touch if they've got follow-up questions or want to pick your brain about something?
Yeah, so 2 places, Patrick Campbell on LinkedIn. There's a number of Patrick Campbells, but you'll see this bright and shiny bearded man for myself. And then also PC at ProfitWell.com is how you can reach me directly. I typically get back to everyone, not always right away. It might take some time, but definitely if you need any advice on pricing or anything like that, we've seen inside a number of companies that can definitely help.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Patrick. And I really enjoyed our session today. Some really good conversation points, and I look forward to having you hopefully as a guest sometime in the future.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Cheers. Bye.